Hey, hiya, it's good to talk with you. It's been a teeny bit, sorry. This video ended up becoming this gargantuan creative snowball that I just had to cut off at a certain point and wrap up lest I just get lost in the sauce, as it were, since this is such a developing situation and all. As you might expect, this is about the boats. Yes, the fabled boat video. I know, it's been a long time. International maritime movements are, let's be real, traditionally rather boring for all but those in the most cursed legal fields. Sorry, maritime law graduates. But maritime commerce has become rather controversial in the last few years. I figured it'd be easier if I split this video into 3 or more parts, as the Houthi situation is incredibly complex, especially as it relates to the past. So, let's jump right in. I'm so sorry. Part 1. Houthis and history. Before we touch on our friends currently attempting to sabotage international trade through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal, I think it's worth looking at the start of the Saudi intervention in Yemen and the following civil war. In 2015, Saudi Arabia, in response to Yemen's government potentially falling to an Iranian-backed Shia militia dubbed Ansar Allah, aka the Houthis, launched a continuous campaign of airstrikes and localized military operations against the Houthis. In reality, this intervention was a combined operation amongst a plethora of allied nations to counter Iranian influence in the region and to shore up the government of then-President Hadi of Yemen, who was amicable to Saudi interests. While this history on the Houthis is a topic that a dissertation would barely scratch, the basic gist is that from 2015 to the end of 2022, a Saudi-led coalition had intervened in Yemen to shore up their preferred government, that of a Sunni or Sunni-friendly government under Hadi, while Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, also known as the Quds Force or the IRGC, and Hezbollah funneled funds and weaponry into the Houthis, a previously local Yemeni Shia militia that grew into a substantially stubborn force. As of late 2022, Saudi Arabia and its allies, including President Hadi, effectively surrendered, at least more or less, via unilateral ceasefire. Fundamentally, the conflict is frozen in a sense, is the best way I suppose I could put it. Neither the Sunni or Saudi-backed forces have really won any sort of defined victory, nor have the Shia or Iranian-backed forces successfully accomplished their goal of a complete takeover of Yemen. In essence, it's a literal Cold War on Saudi Arabia's borders. Of course, Iran loves this. Before we move on, I want to be very clear. The Houthis, their Shia allies within Yemen, and Iran's involvement are absolutely, objectively awful people and groups. While I detest both sidesism, it is also important to note that Saudi Arabia's air campaign and effective blockade of Yemen itself has been brutal and disgusting, with little results to show for it. It's truly a situation where neither actor is really all that pure in their motivations, with neither really producing outcomes for the Yemeni people. You could argue that without Saudi Arabia's involvement, the Houthis and the related Revolutionary Council, which is their supposed interim government, would have taken power for better or for worse in 2015. But frankly, I'm pretty unsure if the end result would have ended up much differently than it is now. Nevertheless, Part 2. Nonsense Narratives. Enter the Israel-Hamas war, everyone's favorite topic. To start, the narrative spun by Iranian or IRGC channels has been a rather fascinating one. Regardless of your feelings or the facts of the matter on the Israel-Hamas war, it is crucial to note that the implication or involvement of the Houthis as some sort of principled actor in the conflict, even if they're tertiary to it, is absolute, complete bunk. Nonsense, trash, etc. Insert your own murder's words there. Sadly, though to be entirely expected, the most recent propaganda campaigns pushed out on social media platforms and the usual quote-unquote news suspects have attempted to paint the Houthis as some sort of liberation or allied freedom fighters for Palestinians. I figured I'd mention early on in this video that the Houthis are, in all respects, modern-day pirates, and frankly, that's giving pirates a really bad rap. While Iranian disinformation campaigns are a video in and of itself, and I am kind of interested in doing one, but hey-o, another topic for another time, Iranian influence campaigns on social media are a well-documented fact, to the point even the biggest platforms on the internet, like Reddit, ignored mass disinformation operations of Iranian actors on its platforms for years. Why? Anyone? $5, $10, $5,000. Money! That's why. It's just money. That's it. That's the only answer you ever need for these types of things. Iran and their allies have attempted to paint the Houthis as a legitimate resistance movement to Israeli actions in Gaza, while pushing what they like to dub as quote-unquote anti-Zionist rhetoric to repaint the group in the eyes of misinformed but ultimately sympathetic Westerners. We can see this in a plethora of ways, from TikTok accounts pushing pure Houthi liberation propaganda to the largest Twitch streamers horrifically and frankly in an incredibly cringe manner, quote-unquote, interviewing a legitimate Houthi terrorist. Also, I do want to say, please bear in mind, the Houthis have been designated terrorists by most nations since January of this year. And they've been that way since their inception, but their true beliefs are also not a new understanding. So please don't be misled on that. How these platforms like Reddit, TikTok, Twitch, etc. allow supposed whitewashing of this type of group while reaping advertising revenue and or benefits is beyond me. Actually, yeah, it's just money. It's literally just money, but whatever, memes aside. Despite all the attempted whitewashing of the group, the Houthis are frankly brutal terrorists that employ child soldiers and terrorize merchant ships for pure financial and propaganda victories. They aren't interested in some sort of principled revolution or liberation of Yemen. They're just interested in power for power's sake. They aren't even remotely similar to Hamas, and that's giving, well, frankly, I can't believe I'm saying this. It's minor credit to Hamas, although it's incredibly minor, to the point I'm not even sure if you could call it that, but hey, I digress.
I sinned against Africa.
In fact, I'd say the Houthis are really simplistic in their ideological predispositions and desires. They aren't some sort of decades-long political terror operation like Hamas. They simply just became a cohesive organization under Iranian funding and support in the mid-2010s, purely for the purposes of producing a proxy war on Saudi Arabia's border. In short, what you have are radical Shia fundamentalists that utilize terror tactics within their own country and a brutal and catastrophic civil war that has created a humanitarian crisis that really makes the situation in Gaza look tame and has been going on for almost 10 years, way beyond any TikTok or YouTube activists' attention span. That's for sure. Yeah, guys, read a book. Jokes aside, the grim reality for Yemenis hasn't improved in a major way in recent years despite a ceasefire in late 2022, and it really isn't as if the Houthis targeting international commerce in the Red Sea is doing them any favors. The recent claims by Houthi spokespersons that their terrorism against merchant ships transiting through the Red Sea are somehow in opposition to Israel, probably not surprisingly announced around the same time South Africa tried to bring charges of a genocide against Israel, is naked opportunism at best and outright Iranian-guided disinformation at worst. So, this little background section leads us to Part 3, Boats and Commerce. So I know. As I quipped at the beginning of the video, international maritime movements are decidedly unsexy. But before you down a handful of Ambien and blackout, hear me out. Everything you use, enjoy, eat, and love are products made possible by the legitimate magic of international supply chains. Don't down the Ambien, hold on, I know. Without shipping through the Red Sea, and by extension the Suez Canal, any good you want to buy, it ain't gonna be made. Sure, it might eventually get around to your local shop, but if you thought COVID supply chain disruptions were bad, good luck. 30% or more of the entirety of global cargo ship traffic, and by extension global supply chains, pass through the Suez every year. Now you might say, oh, 30% isn't really the majority, that's not much. But actually, for a sliver of land that the Suez Canal is, and a tiny body of water like the Red Sea, that's actually enormous. Suppose the Houthis got their wishes and became hostage takers of over a quarter of the world's maritime cargo traffic. Well, for one, everyone's way of life and ease of living will become substantially more expensive and difficult overnight. That's for sure. There are workarounds to bypass the Suez. The canal is really only a modern innovation, but that entails nearly doubling the journey it takes for an average container ship to travel from East Asia to Europe. Those costs are going to quadruple material good costs for producers and exponentially increase consumer good costs. In short, you're screwed. The result can be seen, albeit on a really small level, during the Evergreen fiasco in 2021. While that was thankfully short-lived, it was a pretty prime example of how something as simple as a cargo ship being stuck in the Suez Canal would affect international supply chains going to Europe or the US. According to maritime shipping analysts, given the world's largest logistics companies all but stopping their movements to the Suez currently, cargo will take up to 40% longer to reach the US than it would via the Suez or the Panama Canal. Ironically, due to climate change and its environmental disruptions, the Panama Canal is extraordinarily out of service. Incredible timing, right? Naturally, these statistics shouldn't make you overly comfy with the idea that there are child soldiers being used as proverbial and literal shields while their terrorist mentors launch anti-ship missiles at merchants. So, really, what exactly do the Houthis want? I've alluded to it a little bit throughout the video, but let's just get directly to the core of the issue. There's about 60 WAPO and New York Times op-ed writers slobbering at their keyboards right now, trying to argue some sort of socio-political or philosophical framework that the Houthis are operating under, but no. Shh, put the Twitter fingers away. They want money. They want influence. That's it. Boom. That's it, right? Shocking, I know. Well, like any terrorist entity without a defined end goal other than take over the country, their leaders are puppeteering young and vulnerable militia members around their country under the idea they're fighting the good fight, while their leaders screw off in luxury to international conferences. Sound familiar? Sorry, you might think of certain types of leaders in Qatar, or someone meeting with the Iranian ayatollahs, so on and so forth. I don't know where those came from, sorry. Neither do the Houthis. They're just fighting Saudi imperialism, totally. Anyway, currently the US, UK, France, and the remaining European militaries with any notable naval assets are performing security operations in the Red Sea and over Yemen in an attempt to intimidate the group into sticking to their borders. While US strike groups are understandably terrifying, the efficacy of these, at least on targets like the Houthis, are debatable. That isn't to say they're ineffective, but that a largely diffuse target like the Houthis are an inherently difficult thing to stamp out. Nevertheless, international maritime companies are, while benefiting from US and allied countries, secretly negotiating with the Houthis in an attempt to pay them off. Aside from the blatantly scummy and disgusting nature of this in itself, it's also a hugely ineffective method of keeping armed terrorists from attacking your ships. As with appeasing any terror group, paying them off inevitably leads to an increased price in the future until the amount that they're going to ask for is impossible. Kind of, well, to be frank, the same thing as any sort of schoolyard bully, but I digress. Of course, this also implicates international companies in financing terror groups, but hey, who cares, right? As a future forecast on the Red Sea crisis, well, for sure the Houthis in Yemen itself will be forgotten by the average person in due time, as these types of things always are, but sadly it's highly likely that proxy war militant groups funded by Iran will only grow in threat to the US and the West generally. Also highly likely the IRGC sticks to its main specialty, that is agitating US forces and allied nations in the Middle East and North Africa, in addition to pursuing nuclear missile capabilities in Iran itself. Sadly, I would say the Houthis acting on and attacking international commerce is a subtle, but also very clear prelude to larger Middle Eastern and North African conflicts, and a prelude to a complete blockage of international shipping as soft terror targets become far easier pickings than hardened military targets like the IDF, Egyptian, or Saudi military forces. So, I wanted to make this video to broach some high-level points on who the Houthis actually are, where they come from, who they're financed and supported by, as well as what they really want. I hope that this has helped you educate you to a degree, but in any case, I will be following this video up on Wednesday with more of an update on US congressional shenanigans and the Republicans' nonsense as a tie into US aid to Ukraine. If anything, I highly suspect that if the Israel-Hamas war continues in its current fashion, that Lebanese Hezbollah's allies in Iran will be eager to spark further conflict in Yemen to expand that Israel-Hamas war from a localized conflict into a much larger regional one that will implicate European nations and the US more properly, rather than just political squabbling at the UN or in Brussels. You get the gist. Perhaps unsurprisingly, a certain phallic-headed dictator will be very, very excited about this prospect and his failed imperial ambitions in Ukraine. Which leads me to the next video. I do know that this took me a bit to get out, and I do apologize for that. I was updating a lot of my editing style techniques, as well as a few other aspects of this channel that I duly hope you noticed. My workflow is way, way better now, so please do expect far more consistent uploads from here on. The Houthi situation has been evolving almost daily, and sometimes hourly, so it's also been pretty tough to produce a cohesive overview of the issue, as well as a future forecast, as it were. But hopefully with this video as a baseline, future Houthi updates can be a bit more simplistic for me to produce moving forward. Either way, see you Wednesday with a little update video, and I hope you have an amazing week. Feel free to comment on your thoughts or input. I'm always happy to reply or troll you, depending on the situation. Chat soon. Bye.